of Hanover County and beyond. She was hired to lead the county's new cultural initiative in 2020 and built positive relationships with Hanover's history and cultural groups. Jamie came to Hanover from the Plow Museum in Richmond and more indirectly from Alaska. That's a fun story. You have a chance to tell. So with this brief introduction, let's give a warm Ashland Kiwanis Club welcome to Jamie Fawcett.
All right, I'm going to warn you now, I talk with my hands. So I'm going to do this. If you cannot hear me, just say so. Don't be shy. I'm certainly not. But it is not a problem. PowerPoints, this was just a visual aid that had images. I'm happy to send it along if it's of interest to you. But because we don't have the visuals, I'm happy to expand a little bit on how I came to join your wonderful community. I'm an anthropologist by training. So you think archaeology, you think folks going off into foreign lands and studying and working with other cultures. That's what I did. I also learned that I like food. I like to eat, and I couldn't do it as an anthropologist. So I went into museum studies. Very specifically, I went into museums because there's just a sheer variety. When you think of museum, my guess is something conjures a specific image in your head or experience. Could be taking your grandkid or taking your family vacation on one of the historic ships, however many years ago. Science museums, cultural museums, art museums, on and on and on. I came to Hanover, yes, by way of Poe Museum, but from Alaska, because Hanover already has every version of one of those types of cultural institutions, be they museums, be they local history groups, be they access to Richmond and that I-95 corridor. It is just a plethora of opportunity. So yes, I did come through all of those. My previous experience, I've lived in West Africa. I started out in Ghana, then England, then Alaska. My mom and dad are very pleased that I'm now local in Virginia. They live in South Carolina. Close enough, right? Not enough for a day trip. So. I am thrilled to be here. In fact, because I'm not from here. I love that I can embody what I'm learning the terms, correct me where I'm wrong, but I'm not a from here. I'm also not really a come here either. I live in Essex County. And this gives me a perspective that I love. It can be a learning curve on a day-to-day basis. I feel like I got a handle on something and then I'll talk to someone new and they go, oh, you missed that point of that story. And that's what this museum is really about. This museum is designed to be citizen-driven, to tell your stories, to connect the dots. And I think that in the museum industry, that is a very new concept. We've said it for years, but in the end, we always museums come out as authority and say, this is what you need to know. Let's not do that this time. So I believe you had Mr. Badesky here a couple of months ago, right? Mm-hmm. He is my partner in crime in this. I very much work with Mr. Badesky to make sure that we are embracing our communities. And I mean communities because we vary across and I can draw a string here and connect all the dots. It gets tangled very quickly, which is lovely. But a little bit about how we got to the museum. Hopefully you are all familiar with the historic courthouse where you all go to pay your taxes. There's this historic courthouse park. It has the historic jail. It has the courthouse. Hanover Tavern. And then there's this little building beside it called the Historic Clerk's Office. That building, depending on when you came into first contact with it, was a musty finance office and cubicle silos. It was, at one point it held court documents. Historically, it actually served as the court's home for all of its historic paperwork that was held in from that actual courthouse. Really fun thing that we've really just rediscovered. During the Civil War, those papers, those precious papers, were sent all the way to Richmond to protect them. They went into a warehouse where they burned.
Right.
But thanks to Frank Hargrove Jr., our current clerk of court, he has been, how many years, Betsy? 10 years now, I believe. Sorry, I'm calling on my colleague here. He has been working on digitizing these, these rediscovered documents. They weren't all burned, and they're available for research to really understand our history. He actually has a really great talk on it if you're ever interested in another program. Just saying.
Frank?
Frank?
Okay.
Yeah, Frank Hargrove.
He's a member.
Oh, good. Good. Tap his brain. Yeah, okay, good. Then thank you to her. It is.
It's not Frank.
Right. Frank is the one I end up working with, but this is it exactly. No one person stands alone. You've hit it in one. And thank you to her, because it is a thankless task if you've never had to digitize anything.
Right.
Thankless task. So, old clerk building, built in the 1830s. And it was really used up until it's been on and off used, but about 10 years ago, the county was growing up again, and they said, you know, it's time we had a museum. What does that look like? Enter another 10 years, they're finally kind of getting to that point. And what they realized is that we want a different type of museum. So that is in fact what they did. They started reaching out to the community. When I came in 2020, the museum, the historic clerk's office had been completely gutted. So we started fresh, added up to date, state-of-the-art museum quality equipment. And then things started moving at turtle speed. I think for everyone, COVID, the blessing in disguise was that no cultural activity should ever be rushed. It's not sustainable. We make mistakes as a community. We overlook important factors that make us understand where we come from and where we're going a little bit better. Historically, we did some homework. Historically, county museums, especially if they were born in like 1950s, 60s, 70s, had this mom and pop feel about them. Here's a steering wheel. Here's a steering wheel. Here's a spinning wheel. Sure, here's a steering wheel from granddad's car. All of these are very, very important. But at some point, where the story is lost. So we have decided to do something else. To serve Hanover best, we must recognize that it's your cultural experiences that influence quality of life, and we need to listen to them, and we need to understand them and tell those stories. So a couple of points. We opened our doors to facilitate a meaningful dialogue. This is how we're going to do this, and we're always open to suggestions and improvement. We open our doors to facilitate meaningful dialogue about the joys and concerns that Hanoverians experience. We started with our co-host, the Ashland Museum, with the Smithsonian exhibition called Crossroads, Change in Rural America. We tackled some of the tricky spots about living in an 80-20 rural community. We all want internet and we love trash service, but we do not like urban sprawl. These are issues that our politicians are having to work with on a daily basis. We value our agriculture and our tomatoes, but we're unsure of the best way we can support our local farmers, but also our big farmers. We had a program. This is when I really, really became a huge fan of both John Hodges and John Medeski. We co-hosted a program where John Hodges talked about his service with Hanover County, where it started. It was called one stoplight, two stoplights. Forgive me, Betsy, I'm getting it wrong. Yeah, two stoplights. We now have a gajillion stoplights. And John Medeski got to talk about where he's going. It became a listening session for those in the audience, so that there was no question that John would not answer. He said, just because we may not give an answer you like, we will always give you a reason why we are giving that answer. This is where my PowerPoint would be helpful, but one of the things that came out of our Smithsonian exhibition are these wonderful little cards. I'm internet citizen driven. This says, if you were granted one wish, what change for good would you make in your town? I'm happy to. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. Thing is, these are still active. If you believe you have something to write down, write it down. Share it with us, please. If you were mayor, what would you do? Describe your town in 10 years. Who is here and why? If you were granted one wish, what change for good? I'm sorry, I just read that one. Yes, my favorite answer was, if you were granted one wish, what change for good would you make in your town? And some child wrote, flying cars. Okay, bring it on. Another one, though, wrote something about paying more money for cafeteria workers. Someone else wrote about better integration in our society, being more open to different demographics. You can see it just ranged them. Yeah, it was a broad range. Point 2 about our museum. We are not afraid to dig into the stories that are unexpected and those that are not usually told. Currently, we have an exhibition called Leaders and Legacy, the Women of Hanover. It was guest curated by Ann Cross, who I'm sure many of you know. She's a shining star in this community. And we designed it to build relationships with broader demographics. So we established new relationships with the Monkey Indian tribe, featuring one of their chief queen warriors, Kakakoeski. Cannot tell you how long it took me to say that correctly. We're developing a better relationship with the Black Heritage Society, who's located here in Ashland. Entrepreneurs, Homemade by Suzanne is in our exhibit. Educators. There are so many educators. One of them particularly, though, that I found wonderful, Sue Watson. I think many of you know Sue Watson. She said, I know you're putting in educators, but it's so, I don't want to be featured. And that's what we ran across. A lot of people weren't comfortable being featured because they want their body of work to stand for themselves. And that's heartwarming. But the number of people who then came to her section and saw her Ashland Variety show pictures, and then come to my front desk and say, when are auditions again? When does that start? Is that during this year? Building that community, things we could not have planned for. And then local civic leaders. We have Faye Pritchard in there. We have Carol LaHaye here at Randolph-Macon. Wonderful, wonderful basketball coach, as well as what she called her god-awful coach when she won the 10th championship, I believe it was. It was a huge championship. Broad folks. Point 3, We do not shy away from the realities that you all face. And we only tell stories that are in the community voice. It's not my voice, it's yours. Again, gone are the days, I hope, where museums determine what's important and what you need to know. Museums aren't always fun. That's important. A lot of times people think, yeah, I just want to come in and see that plow. Seriously, I had this conversation 3 weeks ago. Where's the plow? Plow? The concept, though, is that if we can really dig into those stories that aren't being told and connect the dots from why they're important to why they're then and why they're important now, then we can start understanding even broader terms what we haven't even thought to ask. We design our exhibits with local talent, local graphic designers, local artists, local carpenters. And we believe it's important to get a balanced voice. And this isn't always easy. We build our exhibitions to be storylines, to be living and breathing things. Especially with this women's exhibit, I cannot tell you the number of times somebody came in and said, you know, that's not quite right. And then we had to go to reprint. It's a constant research. It's constant growth. We have a wall, an interactive wall. We said, who do we miss? We know we've missed people. There's only so much space. And they put stickies on the wall of people that we need to honor, celebrate, get to know. What's coming? We're still at turtle pace. I am the executive director. I've just been moved up to 32 hours, and I'm a division of 1. But again, there's a benefit there. Again, winging it every day, right? But there's a benefit if we take our time with these things. We get to build more community partnerships. We get to really dig deep into some of those engaging stories that are hyper local to us, but are universal stories for our nation. It's Hanover leading the way. Many of these are hidden. We just did a workshop with the Virginia Public Media on the Martha Ann Field story called Hidden History. Anyone familiar with Martha Ann Field's story already? Yeah. We're working with Gina Rogers, who is she's on the Ashland Museum Board, I believe, yes. Mover and shaker in any community she joins. Martha Ann Fields was an enslaved woman who escaped from the Hanover courthouse area with 5 of her 11 kids in 1863. Made it across Union lines all the way to Hampton, Fort Monroe and Hampton. And that alone is a success story. But it happened right here in Hanover. After that, one of those children, Gina's ancestor, became the first Black state delegate in Virginia, James Apostle Field. This last year, a building at the county complex was rededicated after Martha Ann Fields, and the Fields family had a reunion for the first time. There's also a historic marker in that historic green. This is just the beginning. We're working to build a very intense experiential exhibition on that story, and Agina has very graciously offered to work with us. Final thoughts, and this is just a personal one for me. My husband and I have settled. We settled here after years and years of moving, and we're not in Anchorage anymore. And because of the community that we have landed in, we chose to send our son to your schools. He will be attending, he's a kindergarten. He's 6 or 5 going on 12. But we are sending him to Hanover Academy. And in part it was because that they embodied, just like the public schools do, but they was a good fit for him that really embodies the big picture of where Hanover is and where Hanover is going. And so we're very proud to be a part of your community. I hope that our museum, your museum, reflects that as well. that's me kind of wrapped up. Again, I apologize, I don't have my visuals, but they were just pictures anyway. I'm hoping that there's some in your head